So it seems that the Black Templars have hit the Warhammer 40k tournament scene with a splash, winning 2 grand tournaments and doing well in plenty of other places. Let's take a look at what's strong for the Templars, what units and detachments are people running, and why. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Black Templar army lists, taking a look through a whole bunch of successful ones run by some talented players out there, and seeing what's working and what isn't so far. It hasn't really been all that long since we got the rules for the Black Templar Codex, rules reveals when it went on pre-order, and the new points cost with official digital downloads following not so very long ago. Due to most tournaments tending to need list submissions a week or so in advance, this has been the first major tournament weekend in which the Black Templars have been playing with their new Codex rules, and I was certainly interested to see how the Knights of Sigismund will be doing on the tabletop and which units will be getting the most interest. So far we really don't have too much competitive data for them, but what is there does look kind of encouraging in terms of faction strength, win rates of just over 50% both in competitive and casual datasets, which I think at least will solidly imply they're not going to be an outright weak army. Though for a bit more reliability, we'll need to see how they do over the next month or so. Templar players have managed to win 2 grand tournaments already though, which does show that the Codex can work at the highest level of Warhammer 40k, and plenty of people have had some high placings beyond that as well. For the detachments being used for these, it does seem that it's fallen to the Gladius task force to now be the strongest Black Templar detachment. Pre-Codex they were playing Righteous Crusaders, though kind of weirdly in the Codex they didn't really have a general purpose detachment that really supports the entire Black Templar army. All the 3 Codex detachments were locked to a greater or lesser extent to certain keyworded units, and as a result it seems that the Gladius has taken the fall, doing well to support melee units with access to advance and charge, plus some helpful enough things for range as well. And it seems that the 2 winning lists have both been Gladius ones, with the majority of the high placings being that as well. Outside of that, some people have been experimenting with Wrathful Procession, the Godhammer Transport one, and the Companions of Vehemence, though all in far lower numbers compared with the Gladius in competitive play. In any case, for this video, let's take a look at what's working and why, looking at the 2 lists that managed to win grand tournaments, and then a bunch of other ones that went 4-on-1 or better, and the units that got taken. If you are looking to create or expand a Black Templar army and we're looking to pick up some Warhammer kits in the near future, check out the channel's affiliate discount links in the video description for some savings versus Games Workshop. It helps to support the channel and saves around about 10 or 20% versus going via Games Workshop's web store. A big thank you to anyone using those. I think part of the reason that the Gladius has been more tempting for some is that it feels like quite a lot of the Black Templar strength comes from their core rule now that replaces Oath and Moments. They get to choose one of 4 vows, and provided they've got some somewhat sturdy opponents, they'll usually want to accept any challenge no matter the odds, giving them a +1 to wound in melee against things that are equal or higher toughness, particularly given how many mastercrafted power weapons they get that can make their sword brethren and characters just murderous against the vast majority of things in the game. Then as mentioned, the vast majority of lists have been taking the Gladius task force. To back that up, having advance and charge is excellent for infantry melee units, either for one big turn in the assault doctrine or for one command point whenever you need it. And on top of that they have a lance melee stratagem that could give you a +1 to wound even if you're punching down against something you wound on a 3+, an extra AP in the assault doctrine which could be really big regardless. They've got a 2 command point fights on death one, which is really big for a fighting melee army, a reactive move for infantry, either d6 or 6 inches, access to Armour of Contempt, which is never a bad thing, and some stuff to support ranged units as well, Devastator Doctrine for advance and shoot, and an Ignores Cover one, both of which are quite nice for their Repulsor Executioners. For the enhancements, the most popular ones tend to be the Armour Indomitus for a nice 2+ save and 5+ feel no pain on a character, and the Honour Vehemence for +1 strength and attack, getting further boosted in the Assault Doctrine. Starting off, here's the Gladius Task Force list that won the single biggest tournament of the weekend. This one by Ben Neal, who used it to take first at Denver Fight Club, going 6 games undefeated against a field of 82 players. It seems that for Black Templars at the moment, there really are a few units that seem to be fairly auto-include, and some of their most dangerous melee comes from Marshal and Castellan attached to a Sword Brethren squad. There's 2 such combos here, 2 Marshals and 2 Castellans attached to a squad of 4 Sword Brethren each. So a 245 point unit that's capable of dishing out some immense hurt, as we'll see in just a second. Then to back them up, there's the incredibly fighty Emperor's Champion. He's taking the Honour Vehement here for yet more threat, just an enormously dangerous lone operative. And it's not the only character that's going to be going alone and causing disruption. There's also a Captain in Gravis armour with the Artificer armour, quite a common staple in Gladius, and I'll enjoy the +1 to wound, and also a Combi Weapon Lieutenant for the usual screening and scoring shenanigans. Otherwise for mainline damage though, there's a serious amount of Black Templar firepower. Repulsor Executioners also seem to be in borderline auto-include status. They got an insanely good datasheet out of the Templar Codex, having the bolt-on multi-melter and re-rolling all hit rolls provided there's a Templar unit nearby. So basically Oath a Moment over a large swathe of the board completely for free all the time, plus the multi-melter. Backing them up, there's also a Templar Gladiator Lancer that gets the melter on top as well, and a Ballistus Dreadnought that doesn't really need Oath a Moment as it already rerolls. Otherwise, looks like there's another melee force. I guess Grimaldus will be attaching to one of the Assault Intercessor squads, overall being a nice brawler unit with a good amount of damage and defense, and rerolling wound rolls from the Assault Intercessors potentially. There's a Templar Repulsor that could transport a unit. I guess the Sword Brethren could be jumping out of that, or potentially the Repulsor Executioners to stage for extra threat. They could just foot slog on the board though and hide behind terrain with advance and charge on the go. And then to round off, there's a few objective skirmishing Space Marines, one squad of jump intercessors, and one squad of scouts, both handy for special objectives and the deployment rules, and get nastier when they're wounding on a +1. And then another unit of assault intercessors. I guess in theory the Emperor's Champion could potentially join them. It could certainly beef up his damage output with some big rerolls, though otherwise could be just nice objective brawlers to throw themselves into the mid-board with reroll wounds and the Black Templars +1 to wound rule. Overall certainly looks pretty intimidating, some massively scary melee damage dealers with those Sword Brethren squads and the special characters, and then some seriously heavy firepower to back them up that you just can't ignore, with rerolling Repulsor Executioners, Gladiator Lancers and Ballistus Dreadnoughts with a bunch of multi-melters stock all over them. Perhaps one of the most central combos to the Black Templars at the moment are Sword Brethren with attached characters, the Sword Brethren tending to be in squads of either 4 or 5 for either 105 or 130 points, and typically going heavy on the mastercrafted power weapons. That way you get 3 attacks hitting on a 2+, strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2, and all with lethal hits, quite a well-rounded profile to start out with. Then typically added to them are a Marshal and Castellan. The Marshal basically gives you an extra 2 or 3 Sword Brethren's worth of attacks, with 7 attacks at that same profile with lethal hits, boosted by his Pious Fervour rule for at least 1 more, and then he gives you critical hits on a 5+, so everything on a 5 or more will also wound the enemy. Pretty brutal against tough stuff like Knights. Then added in on top of that is a Castellan. Again, he gives you another bucket load of mastercrafted power weapon attacks. You automatically reroll hit rolls of 1, and if you can pass a leadership test, then you can reroll everything, basically rerolling all dice that aren't a 5 or more to auto-wound tough stuff. Between all that, you have a unit that's just pretty general purpose against everything, already great against medium infantry, and the rerolls and auto-wounds make them far better against everything else. They'll all love the +1 to wound things that are equal or higher toughness than them. And the Castellan also has the bonus of farming some command points as well. If you have multiple squads like this running around the tabletop with obscene amounts of damage, they're almost certainly going to kill something and have at least a chance to farm CP. As a result, it looks like the vast majority of these lists have gone for this combo. Before we move on to the other Gladius ones, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Weyland Yutani terrain. They're one of the many options to get some competitive style Warhammer 40k terrain on the board. They're the ones that make and supply terrain to the WTC. Their terrain is made of lightweight but really quite sturdy printed plastic. It slots together like this, and they have really quite a lot of designs that you can get it in. For example, there's some overgrown ruins, an Arctic laboratory, or a medieval castle that you can see on the right there. The main emphasis of the terrain is being on really quite precise for gameplay purposes. They've got clearly marked out terrain footprints, good line of sight blocking, and are easy enough to put models in the upper floors. For a few examples of their specific things they've got on sale, they've got this WTC Warmaster GT pack. That's $150 or £120 or so. That has a full table worth of terrain, 4 big ruins, 6 medium ones, 4 crates, and some terrain outlines. A fairly balanced one that can work with quite a few competitive formats. They've also got this Pariah Nexus slanted terrain, this one going a bit heavier on the bigger ruins, with 6 big ones, 2 medium ones, and a couple of sort of girder forest style things. And they do have smaller sets as well, such as 4 of these great big ruins, which could be a good way to add some line of sight in very easily to a more narrative and themed board. In any case, check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their stuff. If you do wind up ordering anything, they gave me a code Auspex5 for a 5% discount on them. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Moving on to the other Gladius Task Force list that topped a grand tournament this week. This list was played by David Anderson to take first at Palladium Games Dumpster Fire GT, going 5-0 undefeated against a field of 26 players and overcoming Death Guard and plenty of Knights along the way to get there. Thanks to him for reaching out to me to tell me about this one. It was good to get a few insights from him as to how it plays. Again, this one's got plenty of similar stylings to the first one, the main combos being the Marshal and Castellan units in the squads of 4 Sword Brethren. Enormous amounts of damage here and well capable of punching up with some 5+ lethal hits and 4 rerolls, plus also the Black Templar core rule. Again, there's 1 Impulsor and 2 Repulsor Executioners here. Apparently most of the time they'll start embarked in these, just to prevent any sort of chance of the squads getting damaged just due to how fragile they are. before they go launching themselves into melee. The Repulsor Executioner is just really efficient all around, both potentially being a staging point and also providing massive firepower along the way with those free rerolls and multi-melter. Then, for other major close combat threats, there's a captain with the Power Fist and Mastercrafted Bolter with the Honor Vehement. That's the one that could potentially increase his attacks and strength, and seems that he's running with a squad of Assault Intercessors, jumping out of one of the transports potentially, hitting really very hard in his go turn with that +1 to wound from the Templar rule, and getting a free stratagem thrown in, and there's multiple useful things from the Gladius there. Then there's the Emperor's Champion, who's a melee powerhouse in his own right. He's going all by himself and taking Artificer armor in this one. He's already really quite tanky with that 2+ save and blanking damages. Getting a 5+ feel no pain on top of that just means that a lot of enemy units are going to be unreliable to kill him, and of course you have to get close enough to deal with lone operative to start with. Then for more fire support, there's 2 more Ballistus Dreadnoughts, again a good choice for Templars with 4 rerolls baked in against intact stuff. Some screening, scoring and skirmish units with jump intercessors, 2 sets of them, a set of outriders and 5 scouts. A Templar Repulsor as a staging choice for one of the squads to keep them safe and extend their threat range, and then a Calidus Assassin able to jump on and off the board and hoover up secondary points and potentially be disruptive with a command point debuff aura as well. Again, looks like some very scary stuff. Huge amounts of damage here between the big ranged firepower and then melee threats that you just can't ignore with just about anything. Out of the Templar tanks, it did seem that the Repulsor Executioner was the single biggest winner out of any of them. I guess Games Workshop thought that it wouldn't be quite as powerful, lacking the option of Oath of Moment, so decided to give it a boosted special rule, rather than the very niche one that the standard Repulsor Executioner gets. Instead he gets just 4 rerolls to hit if you shoot something within 12 inches of a friendly Astartes model, so a super easy thing to trigger, provided you're not firing at things at the very back of the enemy army. The Templar version gets the bolt-on multi-melter, which is already an advantage that it used to pay points for, and now it doesn't. So basically it's just a ridiculously efficient gun platform that's also got a transport capacity for other models to stage out of. And some Sword Brethren with 2 attached characters can fit very nicely in there as well. Certainly in the meantime it looks like they're borderline auto-include in theoretically optimised Black Templar lists, though it might not exactly be the best news for people who don't have these, given that they're more of a generic Space Marine unit than a themed Templar one. Plenty of Templar collectors might not own one. There's plenty of other high-performing Gladius Task Force lists. This one was played by Nicholas Willingale, using its take second at Miniature Mayhem, a 27-player grand tournament, only 1 loss and 4 wins. There's similar sort of staple units here, 2 Sword Brethren squads with the characters attached, this time built up to squads of 5, and then no less than 3 Repulsor Executioners rather than 2 of them, and the Emperor's Champion taking the Artificer armor once again. For the other units that are more different to the other lists, there's a Lieutenant in Phobos armor, so able to drop down as a really cheap scoring unit. A 55-point model with Deep Strike can do some secondary objectives and cause some disruption. There's a Blade Guard veteran squad led by a Judas here. Seems there's still enough room for them in an army list, even if Sword Brethren are rather scary. They still have massive damage threats with the +1 to wound that they can get. They'll enjoy the Lance stratagem. They're a bit tougher than the Sword Brethren with their 4+ invulnerable saves, and having the Judas here in the squad means that they can fight first, so it's just going to be harder to deal with than the Sword Brethren are once they've made their first impact. Then there's a unit of Assault Intercessors once again. No less than 3 units of 5 Jump Intercessors here, all very good for rushing around the board, bullying lighter enemy units, and again they'll love the +1 to wound thing. And then a unit of Scouts for screening, scoring, and their return to reserve shenanigans. Aside from Repulsor Executioners and Sword Brethren, the other single biggest staple in these lists seems to be an Emperor's Champion. Not really the biggest surprise in the world, given his exciting Codex stats. He's 90 points for a fast-moving lone operative marine at 8-inch move, has 5 wounds, a 2+ save, a 4+ invulnerable, and ability to blank a damage once per phase. Between all that, can be pretty unreliable to take down, and as we're seeing, people quite enjoy giving him Artificer armor in the Gladius force to give him a 5+ feel no pain. His damage output is fairly fearsome for a lone operative too. 6 attacks at strength 8, AP 3 and damage 3 with some anti-character and precision things going on. Once per game he can have a boosted charge against characters and gain devastating wounds as well. And against tougher stuff, once again that Black Templar +1 to wound will keep him relevant. He should wound the vast majority of vehicles and monsters in the game on a 4+. Overall really quite scary stuff. In the early game, lone operatives can have some big advantages as units that your opponent just can't interact with at long range, taking objectives, screening areas or doing secondaries, and then if and when the enemy does get too close to this guy, he can absolutely charge in, run through an entire squad, and can be pretty unreliable to take down for any one unit given his barriers to damage. Next up, here's a second place list from a small grand tournament called Blue Hen Con. This army run by a Tyler Principio. This one's a bit less cookie cutter in the approach to some of the units. There's still the Emperor's Champion here, 2 Repulsor Executioners, and there are 2 squads of Sword Brethren that looks like the leaders might be a bit different. I'm not 100% sure of character attachments, but perhaps the High Marshal Helbrecht and a Castellan in one squad, and then maybe an Executiuoner Chaplain in the other one, allowing that unit to constantly advance and charge. There's 2 big fighting melee blocks there, and then it looks like there's 2 Judasirs leading 2 blocks of Blade Guard veterans, again all very generally capable in melee, and will be harder to take down between their invulnerable saves and fights first rule. To get the squads where they need to be, as well as the Repulsor Executioners, there's a pair of Templar Repulsors here, again taking the Shield Dome, the Fragstorm Grenades and their Multi-Melter on top. It'll be nice to stage the fighting melee stuff jumping out of them. And then we've got some of the usual small unit objective support, 2 sets of Jump Intercessors, which seem to be very popular for the Black Templars as well, 1 unit of Scouts for infiltrating into the midboard, and 1 unit of Intercessors here for the sticky objectives and a bit of Horde clearance after that's done. It seems out of the once-only characters that the Black Templars have, the Emperor's Champion is the most popular, though High Marshal Helbrecht and Grimaldus have both seen some play in some of these lists. Helbrecht is 120 points and has some big hitting damage at Strength 8, Damage 3 with his Sword of the High Marshals, and for his special rules he hits with a punch of mortal wounds at the start of the fight phase, and buffs his units for a +1 strength and a +1 attack characteristic, pretty nice for Sword Brethren who don't have all that many attacks to start with. Overall, I'd say maybe feels more fairly costed than super standout for 120 points. It's definitely not one to trifle with in melee though. Finally, for our Gladius Task Force list, we've got this one by a Connor Nichols, who uses to take second at Ragnar GT, going 4-1 in a 40-player tournament. Again, some fairly similar themes here with some slight variations and different unit support. This one's the only one that's gone super heavy on the Marshals and Castellans so far. 3 Marshals and 3 Castellans leading 3 squads of Sword Brethren, 2 units of 5 of them and 1 unit of 4. Again, they've got plenty of transport options, 2 Templar Impulsors and 2 Repulsor Executioners, again bringing plenty of big guns, and they're also backed up by a Templar Gladiator Lancer as well, again all very reliable and getting extra value here with an extra multi-melter. On top of that, there's the Emperor's Champion. He's taking the Honor Vehement in this one for extra punch, and a Combi Weapon Lieutenant for the usual Space Marine shenanigans. He's taking the Artificer Armor, so gets a 2+ save, so it's a bit harder to take down than he already is. I don't know if that one's a little bit of a points filler given he's already got a Feel No Pain. Otherwise, for the small unit support, there's a squad of Intercessors with a Power Fist, a squad of Assault Intercessors, and a unit of Infiltrators to deny some reserves a place to land. Again, I will be interested if any of these Emperor's Champions have been attaching to any of the Assault Intercessor squads out there. It looks like several lists have the option, that will mean giving up his powerful lone operative rules. Finally, out of lists at grand tournaments this weekend that didn't use the Gladius Task Force, the single best performing one was this Wrathful Procession list by Jeff Rowe, using it to go 5th at a 32-player grand tournament called Grilling Dice. I did wonder whether people might revisit this one a bit. It's the Grotmus one with the litanies that can give you in-game buffs each turn. Things like a +2 to move are quite nice, and do have some helpful enough melee manipulation stratagems, perhaps feeling like there's a fair few things that could be helpful enough for Crusader squads, though at least pre-Codex it felt thoroughly outshone by Righteous Crusaders. Now that's no longer in the picture, it's arguably one of the most general purpose Black Templar detachments, most abilities not being locked to any one keyword. In any case, this one's a fun looking mixed list with a whole bunch of different characters and lots of options for attaching. I'm going to guess there might be a Castellan plus Marshal combo going in the Sword Brethren as with the rest. The Marshal has Terramon Sensor for a battle shock test, and one of the Castellans has Sacred Rage, allowing you to have fights first once per game. One of the Castellans probably goes alongside Helbrecht, I'd guess probably in the big Crusader squad. I feel like that might make sense to have that the fights first one, as that means that you could have them activating out of sequence and have an enormous amount of melee threats to cut down enemies that try and assail them, and bury them under a whole bunch of chainsaw attacks with a +1 to wound. Then there's a Judas here, who I'd guess would go with the 6 Blade Guard veterans, and again just be a very general purpose thing with their +1 to wound against tough stuff and fights first if they get charged. Somewhere along with all of that though, there's an Assault Intercessor squad, a big unit of 10 of them with a Thunderhammer. I'd guess they're probably being led by one of the characters, though I'm not sure which. I guess it could potentially be Helbrecht himself or even the Emperor's Champion. I'm certainly not too sure how all the characters were attached here, but it seems like there's plenty of options that would work well enough. In any case, to battle it all up for a bunch of skirmishing and objective scoring Space Marines, there's some Intercessors for some sticky objectives and anti-horde, Scouts for some infiltrates and return to reserves shenanigans, Reavers for some cheap deep strike with some combat knives, Vanguard Veterans for a fast-moving and at least fairly tanky unit with a bunch of Storm Shields. That should be a good melee threat with the army rules and their lethal hits on the charge too. 2 Templar Repulsors, which I'd guess will be holding the Sword Brethren and the Blade Guards, and then a lone Gladiator Lancer for a bit of scary anti-tank with a multi-melter on top. It's still using really quite a lot of staples that all the rest were, though it does feel like the most different here, maybe the biggest difference being the lack of Repulsor Executioners, and not quite so much emphasis on the Marshal Castellan combo. Certainly really cool to see someone daring to do well with an actual Black Templar themed detachment though. This list was also the only one to use Crusader Squads. Doesn't look like there's a lot of hype for them in the Black Templar Codex. I feel like losing the Feel No Pains was quite a big blow to them, as they'll often be slogging into the mid-board to hold objectives and things, so being really quite tough to enemy firepower is just about as important, if not more, than being dangerous when they're in melee. Looks like their Righteous Zeal surge move into melee hasn't been quite enough to sell them in terms of being better than the Sword Brethren. I certainly wouldn't say they're unusable casually or anything like that, but it does look like people are valuing the sheer massive punching power of Sword Brethren with multiple attached characters, as opposed to going for the more defensive orientated Crusader Squad, where you won't have quite so much damage, but more bodies to absorb fire. In any case though, let me know what you think of the Black Templar army list. I look forward to hearing your takes on them down in the comments below, or any other insights as to how they play. If you've been getting in some games with the new Templar Codex, let me know how it's been going, and what's been making the Castellan army list for you. That's about it for this one. As mentioned, feel free to check out Weyland Yutani terrain if you have any interest in a competitive style 40k terrain set. I'll leave them links down in the video description below, and there's that code Auspex5 for a 5% discount if you do happen to pick up anything. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the 40k videos coming just about every day, and hopefully have some other Black Templar things later in the week perhaps. I'll be aiming to do a Templar tier list in the not too distant future. The channel's Patreon page is also linked in the video description if you'd like to support a bit more directly. Feel free to check that out. And of course there's those discount links if you happen to be picking up any 40k models in the near future. In any case though, I'll leave that there. A massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.